Hi, I've got Manny de Freitas, the Honourable Member Manny de Freitas here with me. He's also the Shadow Minister of Tourism, and he's currently doing a tourist guide program. So it's wonderful to have you here, Manny.
Thank you.
I would like to ask you a few questions. Is that
Sure.
okay? Right. Obviously, I realize that tourism is far more than the guiding industry. I mean, there's lots and lots that you guys are worried about.
Mm.
But the guiding sector has always been a bit of an orphan of the industry. We didn't get much attention. In our line of duty, we are the ambassadors, and so we actually educate, entertain, and enhance people's knowledge. So very often we get people that have got preconceived ideas about South Africa, and we are supposed to change that. So we really are the ambassadors. However, like I said, this industry that brings in quite a large percentage of our GDP has practically ignored the tourist guide. Have you got a way that you can give hope to us as tourist guides?
Well, I must say that I've been in this portfolio for just over a year. Very different from any of my previous portfolios. So coming in from the outside into the tourism industry, what I have seen, I sense worldwide, but certainly in South Africa, is that people involved in tourism are very special type of people. They're overwhelmingly people who believe in this, who have a passion for this, and want this to work. I've seen how people have given their life saving, how they've given up everything to do this job. And there are very few other professions that, from my experience, I've seen this kind of passion and dedication that I've seen in the tourism industry. So the first for me is that no matter what happens, and boy, we've been through a tough year, not just through this lockdown, but also the economic situation the country is in. I believe in the end, tourism industry will still flourish, despite there being many job losses and so forth, because of the people that it comprises of, that are so passionate about it. So the first is, I believe that the tourism industry mustn't wait for government. That's the first thing. And if you're going to wait for government to make things happen, I don't think there'll be a success formula. And I believe the success of tourism in South Africa is because, ironically, because government has, for the most part, been out of the nose or the business of tourism. But there needs to be a certain measure that government has to be involved in. And I believe that government is involved in the wrong ways. So I'm going to give you some examples. We've managed as a portfolio committee to all agree that the focus during our term as the portfolio committee on tourism is to concentrate on little towns, little what we call small dorpies, and little communities, really getting down to the bottom. Tourism isn't only, as everyone I'm sure is watching, most of you will know more than I do, because I've learned a lot, and that is that it's not about just only the big hotels and the expensive big players, but really it's about getting down to really the bottom. And government should quite honestly keep out of that and rather facilitate that kind of tourism growth. And what do I mean by that? So for example, you'll find that in a local community, there are people with indigenous knowledge that know the stuff, that know storytelling the traditional way, the stories that go back many decades and centuries about their family, about the local community, whatever the case is. They don't need to be trained. They've got the knowledge. They're the best people to impart this knowledge to our tourists. So government needs to just facilitate, is to make sure is those tourists, those visitors, whether they be from abroad or the neighboring province or even the neighboring town, should be able to make it easy for those tourists to get to that small community. So off the top of my head, government should be, for example, making sure that that dirt road that leads to the little village should become a good tarred road, so that it makes it easier and facilitates those tourists to get there. If that little town doesn't have ablution facilities, for example, they should facilitate that kind of thing. And in just doing that on its own, I can assure you that with the passion that I've seen of people in the tourist industry, they're going to naturally start developing their own things.
You've touched on a few things here, Manny, that I find quite interesting. The fact that the tourism industry is a special industry,
Yeah.
and that it's got the capacity basically to change communities,
Yes.
to let literally social justice happen in communities.
Yeah.
So tourism in communities, like you say, should be an absolute number one on the portfolio committee's
Yes.
minds.
Yes.
Where I do slightly differ from you is that yes, you get the storytellers here to get those, but they need to get some kind of training in customer care and things like that. According to our act, that is a requirement. But to get those stories out of the people, to make an enriching experience for every visitor, and people don't do that if they don't value what they have.
Yes.
And that's what tourism can do. You start valuing who you are and what you have.
And that was my next point. My next point is once government facilitates the big stuff that needs to be done, the big roads, the big reception centre for visitors, whatever the case is, little things like making sure that your tour guides are indeed have the indigenous knowledge, but how do they impart it? How do they maximize this gift that is not just a gift, but also is an economic driver for themselves? So there needs to be real education down on the ground, and already it's happening. But I do see there's a lot of disconnect between tourist guides, for example, and the local community, and they don't understand the importance. So there needs to be on the ground education and explanation and so forth. And also, I don't want to delve into too much because I guess there's not enough time, but we need to find or train these tour guides in such a way that they won't necessarily need to read and write to do so. Because the reality is that you've got many of these amazing people who've got a wealth of knowledge who are officially illiterate, who can't at a certain level, be able to write an exam, whatever the case is. So we need to find interesting, innovative ways of making sure that they're competent without necessarily writing things down, because that holds back a lot of people. I just want to while I'm in the same breath, is that not just that. I mean, yes, this is about tour guides, but automatically, what other industry is there, excepting for the tourist industry, where, for example, you have a gogo in a township who has a spare room, and it's there, and it's available and waiting, and it's not being used. She can spruce it up with some basic linen bedding, with a cushion here and there, with a little pot of flowers, and automatically she has a business there and then, in that she can Airbnb it or rent it out in a home. And if you look at statistics, which I have, is more and more international tourists are now moving away from the traditional hotel. They want the real authentic experience. They want to live, in our case, in a township for a few days. They want to be able to experience what it's really like to sit around the fire, and not necessarily, not that I'm denigrating a lodge, for example. I mean, that's appropriate and it's correct and it's wonderful. But some people don't want that. They actually want to sit around with the village elders to talk and share experiences, to talk about stories, to share the local cuisine, the local drink, and so forth. And so we need to facilitate that. And government doesn't need to be involved in that. They just need the environment for it to be allowed to happen.
Yeah.
So you don't need to interfere in the person's home in that little room, because I can promise you the host of that house is going to make it as hospitable and as warm, as welcoming as possible. But what government can do are the big things. They can facilitate it. And so as soon as, and this is a big fight I'm having, or not a fight, but a long process to convince government that actually it's only certain things they need to do, that suddenly the face of tourism and the transformation that they keep on talking about starts happening by doing these bigger things. It's not the immediate things. It's not, I keep on hearing about seed capital and so forth. That gogo that I'm giving as an example in the township doesn't need that seed capital. She just needs the opportunity and the environment, and I can promise you she will be able to do it. So we need to create the facility and the environment to make it happen. So I'm very optimistic, because the portfolio committee has agrees with that perspective. It's just, how do we do it? What is the end point? So we all agree on the end point, but how do we get to that end point? And so that's the challenge, the hard work that I've trying to get to. And so and certainly this course that I'm doing, this tour guides tour course, is showing a lot more, because you're quite right. It's tour guides are the ambassadors, but it's a lot more. I didn't realize how much research one needs to do. Because tour guides don't know everything. It's impossible, but to know everything. But so when you're going to go and you get briefed that you're going to be having a group of tourists and they've got to visit a particular area, you need to go into research the area, find out facts, and not make up nonsense. Because, as you say, they're the ambassadors, and so that we then portray a good image, a positive image of what South Africa is about. I think each player in our field, in the tourism field, has a different job to do. And quite frankly, where it's not your business, then stay out of that and let the appropriate people do the correct business.
So you've explained very clearly now what government's role can be and should be in this whole industry. But what do you think ordinary South Africans can do to give hope again? Because of domestic tourism is now so in everybody's mind, whatever.
Yes.
But we don't get tourists, South African tourists, to use guides.
Yes. Well, there are a few things. The irony, I think, is that the worst thing and also the best thing that could happen to tourism was COVID and lockdown. Because suddenly, tourism was in the news. Every other week we've been hearing about tourism. Never heard about it before. Everybody kind of intellectually understood how important tourism was. But now people have been hit in the face on how important tourism is. And also the definition of tourism. Many of us, and I probably had a perception of that as well, is you had to be a foreigner, you had to be from far away, and you had to have lots of money, or whatever the case is. And that's not the case. You could be a tourist for a day in your own suburb, never mind your own city.
Exactly.
So it's about perception changing, and ironically, I think COVID has done that. It's forced people to realize, ironically, as much as I hated these lockdowns, and then initially they didn't open the provinces, so you couldn't go to a neighboring province. But people in Gauteng, for example, were desperate to go away for weekends. And I can give you a list of people that went away on their weekends that they were forced to go into tour in their own province, where they ordinarily wouldn't have to. So this is an opportunity for not government, but by the tourism industry, irrespective of who you are, whether you're a tour operator, whether you're a tour guide, whether you have accommodation, whatever the case is, grab it on now. While the momentum is hot now, take the opportunity. And I can promise you, you start looking at, Gauteng is the great example because it's my province, but it's also the province that people don't think you could tour in. There's no tourism happening in Gauteng. What would you go and see? That perception needs to change. There's so much to go and see. Because yes, beautiful Mpumalanga with its rolling hills, and KwaZulu-Natal with its greenery and so forth, that's in its place as well. But we also actually have that as well. We also have a beautiful, beautiful cities and beautiful neighborhoods and townships and everything else that goes with it. And so we need to enhance what is there. So we need to, and I think it's great that we have, off the top of my head, we've got Vilakazi Street, for example, in Soweto. But what about the rest of Soweto? There's so many other hidden gems. And I'm saying this is where the Gogo, I gave an example, comes in. This is where the tour guide that is a qualified tour guide, can use the opportunity to showcase his or her local township, his local section of township, his local street, where so much history may have happened, or changes have taken place, or whatever the case is. So I'm saying tour guides should not just be looking at just the standard tick box kind of perfect tours that we're so used to. We should be showcasing and looking at more variety, looking at different things, so that there's a wider menu of things to look at. And then secondly, to not just think about the German, the French, the Italian, the American tourists, but think about the Joburger visiting Soweto, the Sowetan visiting Sandton. Whatever the combinations are. So those are things. I'm not going to certainly talk about the pricing. Those are things that I want to drive. I do believe that there should be two price lists, if you like, for someone touring, for example, Cape Town, which is renowned for being expensive, but absolutely reasonable for overseas tourists because of the good currency. Yet we're paying the equivalent of what a dollar or a euro would be paying, and I certainly think that's unfair. And that's a fight that I would like to have on the side, because you could still be a business locally, you could still make money, you can still be successful, but charge locals a local equivalent rates and not overcharge them, so that we can also be tourists. But that's a kind of a side fight, if you like.
Well, it's not quite side, because we are trying to develop a tourism culture in South Africa to do that. But you've just proven it to me by taking me on little tour here in Joburg that I never thought was part
Yeah.
of Joburg.
Yes.
So, like you mentioned, the traditional places that we visit are sort of a little bit, over visited at this stage.
Okay.
But we need to, especially for our local tourists, for our domestic tourists,
Yeah.
to discover these new,
Yes.
if you say, new areas of our own area.
The thing is that if the reason why I'm saying that, I just wanted to expand on that, is that because yes, those famous sites that you're talking about, Villa Street, Robben Island,
Yeah.
Table Mountain, of course those are places, and those I would guess would be geared towards overseas tourists. Who doesn't want to go and see Table Mountain? Who doesn't want to go to Villa Street? I mean, yes, sure.
Yeah.
But what about our locals? Once you've been to Villa Street once, you're probably not going to go there that often, possibly, or you'd want to see something new, something different, something
Yes.
unusual.
Yes.
How many people know about their own local suburb where they live?
Manny, I believe that the only way out of the basically mess that we are in at the moment is if we act in solidarity. In other words, that all of us pull together and actually understand the suffering of others. And in that way, we can basically raise the dignity of people. Like you
Yes.
were mentioning, I mean, the Gogo and the township can easily, become part of the tourism industry.
Entrepreneur, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And in that way, actually raise her dignity
Yes.
and pull in all the other people. I mean, I've got lots of examples like that where it's actually working.
And when that happens, the irony is that even if you think it has nothing to do with you, it actually does, because everything is a chain reaction. It's like a domino effect. So the fact that you will find more homestays in townships means there'll be a domino effect in that you'll require more tour guides, which means you'll require more infrastructure for whatever is required, which then requires, and I can go on and on and on. So everything does have an impact, and this tourism supply chain that they keep on talking about, every single player is integral to it.
Yes.
And I do sense that sometimes people, and this is as an outsider, I sense some players in the tourism industry don't realize that, or aren't kind of feel that they're not that important, or don't contribute that much, and so forth. I almost also sense that, and this is again my perception, so I could be totally wrong, I hope I am, and that is, I almost feel that tour guides almost have an inferiority complex, because they are, I certainly didn't realize how important and powerful, in a good way, powerful and the impact that they have on people, not just tourists themselves, but on the economy, on themselves, on people around them. And I almost feel like they almost talk down about themselves, about the industry, and I think that's not helpful. I think we need to, whatever we're doing, we're all an important player, and I think we need to appreciate that, and we need to encourage growth. So if you are a tour guide, and I almost sense other tour guides kind of feel we don't need more tour guides, because that means business is going to go away from me personally, and I'm saying actually it's the opposite. We want more tour guides, more tourist sites. And if you as a tour guide are not getting enough work, what's stopping you from creating new walking tours? Why hasn't there been? I mean, you and I went to a walk this morning, Joleen, and we walked around in the middle of a northern suburb in Johannesburg. I've never heard of a walking tour in this area. And I'm saying, why not?
It was so interesting.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm saying, why not? I'm not a tour guide, and I was able to put a 1 hour tour together relatively easy, because nowadays it's not like the old days. You used to go to the Britannica Encyclopedia in the library. You can now have it at your fingertips on Google, and you can fact check these things. So I'm saying is that you as a tour guide, if you as a player, as an accommodation person, whatever, and you're saying, I don't have enough accommodation, I don't have enough tour guides, I don't have enough people in a particular player, what's stopping you from doing it? So I'm saying we need to take our own destiny into our own hands.
Absolutely. And then stand, like you said, in solidarity.
Absolutely.
But you mentioned something very interesting. How do we get a platform? Where do we get a platform to bring this whole thing to the different to government on the one side, and to South Africans on the other side? Yes. That we can show the solidarity that there should be, and what effect that can have.
As I said earlier, I think you're quite right. That question would be very relevant before the lockdown. I'm saying that it's relevant now, but I think the the tourism sector, the entire sector, has gone through kind of a metamorphosis. It's really changed because suddenly they've gone and had the guts to stand out. I was water cannoned outside Parliament a few weeks back, and I saw people from the restaurant industry to tour guides to tour operators standing and having the guts to actually stand up for themselves. And I sense that before that, perhaps that didn't happen.
No,
we were too timid and too afraid. And I'm saying we actually need that activism, that pre-94 activism back, but this time we're activating for tourism. And we must. It is a very dignified work that tourists do. In fact, it's more than just a job, as I said earlier. You are ambassadors, and I certainly am now more appreciative than ever that about research, the amount of homework, the amount of preparation that a good tour guide. I'm sure there are many bad tour guides out there, and they should be ashamed of themselves. Shame on them, and they should actually up their game. Now, if every tour guide, every registered tour guide, ups his or her game, you're going to find that those are going to fall behind, and the best of the best are going to flourish. And I'm saying it's now time to stand up. And what I mean by that is it means there needs to be unity. We don't need to gatekeep and worry about the fact that there are less than 14,000 tour guides in South Africa. That's nothing. That's nothing. I haven't done a comparison. But if I were to do some bit of research and I were to hypothetically choose any country in the world, I can probably tell you that there'd probably be hundreds of thousands of tour guides in those successful tourism countries. And why is that? Because they are keeping tourism alive and bright and innovative all the time. They're not just sticking to the usual tried and tested tour sites and tours that have been designed. They've gone and become imaginative, thought out of the box and so forth. And I think now's the time to do it. And if you're going to continue doing the same, then you're going to receive the same. And I'm saying it's time to flourish. Secondly, is there needs to be more interaction with other sectors, so that because a thing that I've noticed is that all the different subsectors within the tourism industry kind of work in silos. Government does as well, and I don't want to talk about that because this discussion isn't about that. But certainly things that the private sector in the tourism industry can do can certainly change that. So there's no reason why tour guides can have a closer relationship with tour operators. There's no reason why tour operators can't have a closer relationship with accommodation enterprises. And when I mean accommodation enterprises, I mean the whole gamut, not just the 10-story fancy hotel, but I'm talking about the Gogo in the township. Those are opportunities, and a tourist will get at a fraction of the price, the same accommodation, twice as much love and attention, and twice as better experience than they would have got at a very well-known hotel, if that's what they want. And I'm saying that must be encouraged because that's a spin-off on hypothetically tour guides, for example.
Well, exactly. And that's more personalized tours and more getting really to have an experience of what South Africa is all about.
And also the other thing is that, sorry to interrupt you, Joleen, that is that you actually want, like any other business, you want repeat business. You want the German tourists to return. You want them to come back to South Africa because they loved it so much. They're going to want to come back. They're probably going to want to use you as the tour guide. You'll probably be too busy. And so therefore, more tour guides will be required so that they can be accommodated. So it's a mindset that needs to change.
Absolutely. But like I said, the international tourist market, I'm sure will recover, not soon, but it will recover.
Right.
My concern also is very much the local domestic market.
Absolutely.
And that we as South Africans need to get to know our country better and get the pride that we need to have for this country, that we can have for this country.
And I, it's in this, as I said, I'm not the expert in tourism. I've been appointed as a shadow minister, and it was my job to research, and it's one of the reasons why I'm doing the tour guide report. And what I am finding is I'm asking questions that I never asked before, and perhaps I wonder if tour guides have not asked these questions. And the questions are, why haven't you done a walking tour or designed a walking tour in, let me pick a suburb, in the case of Cape Town, Newlands, or in not just in the CBD, around Parliament or whatever, but Cape Town, the Western Cape, is filled with history. It is falling at your feet. Why haven't you done a walking tour in any suburb that you want to choose? In the case of Johannesburg, why hasn't there been a walking tour in Kensington, in Parktown North, in Soweto East, in Zeni, in Alexander Township? Why haven't they been? Why haven't they been? And that's because no one's done it. Now, I'm challenging tour operators. You could do it. And I can promise you that somebody in Sandton would love to do a walking tour in Alexander if they know that it's conducive, that it's safe, that it's interesting, because believe me, that word of mouth is going to start growing, and the Kugel in Sandton is going to want to take that walk in Alexander, I can assure you.
Well, there you go. We've got hope and we've got work to do. So
Yes.
thank you very much, Honourable Member, for your time here. Thank you, Manny. It was really great.
Pleasure's always mine.